The salt was supposed to eat the bond quietly. That was the mercy the court promised itself. No blade against the rejected bride's throat. No blood spilled across the wedding floor. No screaming beneath the oath lanterns while the northern nobles watched from their moonlit balconies. Only a white circle of sacred salt poured around Ivara Sable's knees, bright as powdered bone, and one royal sentence from the Alpha King who had sworn to bind her 3 nights before. I reject the bond. After that, the salt would do what oath salt had always done in the Ashvane court. It would dry the mate thread until nothing living remained. Ivara knelt in the center of the circle with her bridal veil cut in half and her hands folded in her lap so no one would see them shaking. The Hall of Oaths stretched around her, long and cold, its black marble floor reflecting her like a ghost, dressed for a ceremony that had already become a burial. White candles burned in iron stands. The walls were carved with wolves carrying wedding lanterns in their mouths, but tonight every stone wolf looked away. They had not stripped off her wedding gown. That would have been kinder. Instead, they left her in it. Silver silk, pearl buttons, a moon-white train that had brushed Alpha King Torren Ashvane's boots when he turned from her before the vows were sealed. Now the hem lay inside the salt circle, gathering grains like frost. Beyond the circle, the court watched with the stillness of people who wanted ruin but preferred it to look lawful. Ivara heard the whispers without lifting her head. Salt-sick bride. Oath-rot. The girl who blackens sacred salt. They did not call her unwanted. They did not call her weak. Those were small cruelties, easy to survive. They called her something cleaner, colder, something that made fear sound like doctrine. Cursed bride. Because every time Ivara touched oath salt, it darkened. At 12, she had brushed a bowl of betrothal salt in her village shrine, and the grains turned gray before the priest could bless them. At 16, when her cousin swore a harvest pact, the salt line near Ivara's feet curled black and cracked. At 22, after Torren chose her before the court, the wedding salt set aside for their mating vow had turned smoke dark the moment her sleeve passed over it. The court had not asked why. Courts rarely asked why when fear offered a simpler answer. Lord Varric stood beside the king's dais with both hands resting on his black cane. He was Torren's uncle, oath-regent in all but name, a silver-haired man with a scholar's calm and a butcher's patience. During the border wars, he had kept the kingdom functioning through oath law, treaty law, blood law, and every old rule frightened men obeyed when courage failed. Half the court trusted him because he never raised his voice. Ivara feared him for the same reason. The circle is complete, Varric said. The salt priestesses stepped back. Ivara finally lifted her eyes. Torren Ashvane stood at the edge of the dais in black ceremonial armor, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, wearing no crown, because mating vows were supposed to be spoken as wolf before king. A pale scar ran from beneath his jaw to the hollow of his throat, disappearing under his collar. He had never told her how he received it. She had touched it once. Only once. In the western garden, beneath sleet and lantern light, when he had caught her wrist after she slipped on the frozen stair. His hand had closed around hers too quickly, too tightly, and for one breath his guarded face had nearly broken. "Do not ask me for vows lightly," he had said. I did not ask. No, his thumb had moved once against her pulse. That is why I trust you. Now that same mouth had rejected her before the entire court. But Ivara could not forget the look in his eyes when the words left him. Not relief. Not cruelty. Horror. As if he had heard himself speak from behind a locked door. Varric raised his cane and tapped the marble once. The sound cut the hall silent. "Alpha King," he said smoothly, "speak the rejection once more, so the salt may finish what mercy began." Torren's jaw tightened. Ivara saw it, so did Varric. For a moment, Torren did not move. His wolf shadow lay behind him across the dais steps, huge and black, but its muzzle was pressed to the marble as if something unseen held it down. The beast's eyes burned silver, furious and helpless. The court did not look at the shadow. Ivara did. Torren's gaze found hers across the salt. There was warning in it. Not for him. For her. Run, his eyes seemed to say, though neither of them could move. Then Varric touched 2 fingers to the silver head of his cane. Torren flinched. The old scar at his throat darkened like salt dropped into blood. When he spoke, the first sound was his. E. The second was not. It entered beneath his voice, lower and older, hidden inside the shape of command. Reject. Ivara felt the word strike the salt circle. The grains around her knees hissed. The court leaned forward. Torren's face went white. He fought it. She saw the effort tear through his body, saw his hand curl into a fist hard enough to split skin against his palm. But the hidden command had already entered the royal oath. I reject the mate bond, he said. The salt lit. White fire raced around Ivara. It was not hot. Heat would have been kinder. This was dryness so deep it pulled at the invisible thread beneath her ribs, the place where Torren's vow had settled before the court turned it into a weapon. Pain bent her forward. The mate thread stretched between them, thin and silver, trembling above the circle. The court sighed. Not with pity. With satisfaction. Ivara nearly let the salt take it. That was the shame she would remember later. Not kneeling, not the veil cut from her head, not the whispers. The moment when pain became so clean and final that surrender almost looked like rest. Then Torren made a sound. Small, choked, not a king's command, not even a man's plea. A wounded breath caught under another man's voice. Ivara looked up. His wolf shadow was clawing the marble. Not toward her, toward his own throat. The salt burned brighter. Varric smiled. Something inside Ivara went still. Not healed, not powerful, clear. The court wanted the salt to dissolve her bond while she knelt obediently in the center of its circle. They wanted her to be consumed by a law that had never asked her whether it had the right to touch what lived inside her. So Ivara unfolded her shaking hands. The salt priestess nearest her whispered, "Do not touch the line." Ivara ignored her. She pressed both palms into the burning salt. The pain was immediate. White fire bit through skin. Her palms split against the grains, and blood welled bright red before turning pale, then silver, then white as moonlit bone. The salt stopped hissing. The circle went silent. Varric's smile vanished. Ivara bent lower, pressing her wounded hands deeper into the salt. "If you are sacred," she whispered, voice shaking, then witness. The word entered the circle, not loudly, but truly. The salt under her palms turned black, then white again, then rose. Grain by grain, the circle lifted from the marble, climbing around her wrists, her arms, her shoulders. It did not pull her up. It answered the blood she had given it. Her torn veil floated behind her. Her wedding train spread like frost over the black floor. The candles went out. The salt gathered above her bowed head, building a shape too large for the circle meant to contain it. The court screamed. A wolf formed around Ivara, a giant white wolf made of salt, moonlight, and breath. Its paws struck the marble outside the circle without breaking the line. Its body arched over her like a living shield, not because she had been chosen by mercy, but because she had forced the salt to bear witness instead of obeying a lie. The wolf lowered its enormous head. It did not look at Ivara. It looked at Torren's throat, at the scar blackening beneath his skin. Torren staggered forward. Varric stepped back. For the first time all night, fear touched the oath-regent's face. The white wolf opened its mouth and growled. The sound did not shake the hall. It shook the oath. The silver thread between Ivara and Torren brightened, and inside Torren's voice, something that did not belong to him screamed. The salt wolf lunged, not at the Alpha King, at the hidden command buried in his rejection. Torren's throat split with a sound that was not flesh. It was an oath being torn open. The white wolf struck him in a blur of salt and moonlight, but its teeth did not touch his skin. Its jaws closed around the darkened scar at the hollow of his throat, and the entire hall of oaths convulsed as if the stones themselves had bitten down on a lie. Torren staggered back against the dais. Every noble screamed at once. "Protect the king! Kill the salt beast! The bride has cursed him." Steel rang through the hall. Guards surged forward from both sides, but the salt circle rose higher around Ivara, not as a wall given to her by mercy, but as a witness she was still holding together with both bleeding hands. Her palms burned where she pressed them into the grains. The pain was clean and savage, every crystal cutting deeper, as if the salt demanded proof that she meant what she had asked. Witness, not rescue, not revenge. Witness, The giant white wolf kept its jaws locked around the unseen thing in Torren's throat. Torren's head fell back, veins standing in his neck, both hands clenching at his sides rather than pushing the wolf away. His wolf shadow thrashed behind him, muzzle still pinned to the marble by a force no chain could show. Lord Varric Morth lifted his cane. "Archers," he commanded, "salt iron through the bride." Ivara heard him. So did the salt. The circle snapped outward. Not far, only enough. The first arrow flew and turned white in midair, crumbling into harmless grains before it crossed the line. The second struck the edge of the circle and fell black at Ivara's knee. The salt did not attack the archers. It only ruined the obedience inside the weapons. Varric's face tightened. Ivara saw the fear return. Small, quick, hidden almost at once. But she saw it. She curled her fingers deeper into the salt until blood ran between the grains. "Not them," she whispered. The white wolf's ears shifted toward her. Ivara did not know how to command it. She did not feel powerful. She felt wounded, humiliated, and close to breaking. But the salt was no longer burning her bond apart. It was listening through her blood. She forced herself to look at Torren. "Not him," she said, louder this time. The voice. The wolf obeyed. Its jaws tightened. Torren made a strangled sound, and the scar at his throat opened not with blood, but with black salt. Grain by grain, something dark spilled out from beneath his skin and gathered in the air before his mouth. It looked like smoke at first. Then thread. Then writing without letters. Accoutrement, hidden inside the shape of his rejection. The court fell silent, so fast the candles seemed loud when they guttered back to life. Torren dropped to one knee. The white wolf released his throat, but remained over him. Enormous paws braced on either side of his body. Its head lowered until its pale eyes looked straight into his. It was not guarding Ivara from him now. It was holding him still, while his own voice tried to return. Torren's mouth opened. No sound came. Varric struck his cane against the marble. The dark command thread snapped back toward Torren's throat, like a leech returning to a wound. Ivara reacted before thought. She dragged both hands through the salt circle. The pain nearly blinded her. Blood spread in two red arcs through the white grains, and where her palms passed, the circle changed shape. It was no longer a perfect ring around a condemned bride. It became a broken crescent pointing toward the king. The dark command thread hit the crescent and recoiled. A whisper moved through the hall, not from the court, from the salt under Ivara's hands. False oath. Varric's cane cracked once down its silver head. "Do not listen to ritual noise," he said. "The bride has corrupted the circle. She is salt wolf blood. Her kind rots sacred bonds by nature." Zaltwolf. The phrase struck the hall harder than curse. Several salt priestesses stepped back from Ivara with horror in their faces. One made the sign of closed jaws over her heart. Another whispered an old prayer against sea-born wolves and marriage rot. Ivara had heard stories, but never as truth. Salt wolf blood belonged to old coast graves, to women who walked between tide lines and sealed vows with open palms, to wolves said to preserve honest bonds and rot false ones. In court songs, they were witches. In temple law, they were extinct. Varric had known the name. That meant he had known what she was before the circle. Ivara looked at him across the white salt and black marble. "You brought me here because of it." His eyes cooled. "No," he said. "I brought you here because the king forgot how dangerous mercy becomes when men mistake it for love." Torren's head lifted. The words landed in him somehow, under pain, under the damaged oath. His eyes found Varric. For one breath, he looked less like a rejected bridegroom, and more like a boy hearing a locked door open somewhere in his past. "Mercy," Torren rasped. His true voice. Hoarse. Broken. His own. Ivara's heart clenched despite herself. Varric's expression hardened. "Be silent." The command struck before the cane did. It entered the air as a thin black ring and closed around Torren's throat. Torren choked. The white wolf snarled, but the ring tightened faster, dragging the dark command thread back into the old scar. Ivara tried to rise. The salt circle punished her for it. Fire ripped through her palms and up her arms. She fell forward onto one hand, bridal silk pooling in salt and blood. The court saw her falter, and began to breathe again, eager for the miracle to end before it asked too much of them. Torren saw too. His face changed, not softened, sharpened by helpless fury. He forced one hand to the marble, then another. The black ring at his throat tightened until blood beaded along the scar. "Do not," he forced out. Varric turned toward him. "Do not what, Majesty?" Torren's eyes stayed on Ivara. "Spend yourself for my voice." The words broke something open in her chest. Not the bond, not forgiveness. Something more dangerous. The knowledge that he understood what the salt was asking of her. Her blood, her pain, her choice to turn a killing circle into witness, while everyone in the hall called it corruption. Varric heard the words too, and his mouth thinned. "You see," he said to the court, "the bond still makes him weak. Even half-rotted, it teaches him to place a cursed bride above his throne." Ivara lifted her bleeding hand from the salt. The white wolf flickered. "No." She pressed it down again. Harder. The wolf steadied. "I am not above his throne," she said. Her voice shook, but the hall carried it. "I am under your lie." The salt crescent flared. The dark ring around Torren's throat cracked. For the first time, the black command inside his scar took shape. A second mouth appeared briefly beneath his skin, made of shadow and salt, pressed over his own voice like a seal. The court recoiled. Torren's wolf shadow roared against the marble. Varric's hand tightened over the cane. Ivara looked at the second mouth and understood with cold clarity that the rejection had not been a moment of weakness. It had been prepared, planted, waiting for the right sentence to use his royal voice against him. She spread both hands wide in the salt. "Name it," she whispered. The white wolf opened its jaws. The second mouth in Torren's throat screamed. Then, across the black marble between king and bride, the salt wrote one word in a line of burning white grains. "Regent." Every face turned toward Varric Morth. He did not deny it. He only lifted his cane, and the silver head split open like an eye. Torren's wolf shadow suddenly rose from the dais. Free. Wrongly free. Its eyes went black. Varric spoke one quiet command through the cane. "Guard." The king's own wolf shadow lunged at Ivara inside the salt circle. The wolf shadow did not snarl when it lunged. That was how Ivara knew it was not hunting. It crossed the Hall of Oaths in a rush of black smoke and royal silver fire, enormous paws striking the marble without sound, jaws wide, eyes gone dark under Lord Varric Morth's command. Guards scattered from its path. Nobles cried out from the balconies. Salt priestesses pressed their bowls to their chests and whispered prayers that broke apart before they reached the air. Guard. The word still hung in the hall. It should have meant protect the king. Varric had twisted it into destroy the threat. Ivara knelt inside the broken salt crescent, with both palms split open in the grains. The white salt wolf arched over her, ready to strike back, but Ivara felt the danger beneath that mercy. If the white wolf attacked Torren's shadow, the court would call it proof. Cursed bride against Alpha King. Salt wolf blood against royal blood. A bride rejected once, now shown as enemy before everyone who had come to see her bond dissolve. So when the black wolf shadow reached the edge of the crescent, Ivara lifted one bleeding hand. "Do not fight him," she whispered. The white wolf froze. Torren heard her. Even with the dark ring around his throat and the false command still lodged beneath his scar, he heard. His eyes widened, furious and afraid, as if he could see the shape of what she intended. "No," he forced out. His voice cracked on the single word. The black wolf shadow struck. The hall shook. Its jaws closed around Ivara's raised hand. Pain did not come first. Cold did. A deep, grave-cold command that rushed up her arm and into her chest. The shadow's teeth did not pierce her flesh, but the force behind them pressed against her bones, as if the beast had been ordered to make her disappear without leaving blood. Ivara kept her hand there. The wolf's eyes were black. Beneath the black, she saw silver trapped like moonlight under ice. "You do not want this," she said. The jaws trembled. Varric's cane tapped the marble. "Bite." The command entered the wolf shadow like a hook. Its teeth began to close. Ivara drove her other hand through the salt. Her palms screamed. Blood ran into the white grains, bright red for one heartbeat, then pale, then white as crushed moonstone. The salt climbed her fingers, crossed her wrist, and poured into the shadow's mouth around her trapped hand. The wolf shadow convulsed, not from harm, from being tasted. The salt moved through its darkness, searching for the shape of the order buried inside it. Ivara felt the command uncoil in fragments. Guard the king. Guard the throne. Guard the royal oath. Guard the oath-regent. Guard the lie. The final line burned colder than the rest. It did not carry Torren's will. It carried Varric's. Ivara's breath shook. There you are. Varric's face did not change, but his hand tightened around the cane. Ivara, Torren rasped. His voice was nearly gone. Still, it was his. She wanted to look at him, wanted to let the sound matter. But the shadow wolf's jaws were still around her hand, and if she lost focus, Varric's command would finish what the salt circle had failed to do. Ivara pressed her forehead to the shadow's muzzle. Her blood marked its smoke. Spit out what is not him, she whispered. The white wolf behind her lowered its head and breathed across the crescent. Salt lifted in a slow spiral, entering the black shadow like pale fireflies. The beast shook harder. Its paws scraped the marble. The silver trapped in its eyes brightened. Varric struck his cane down. Guard. This time the word cracked. The wolf shadow gagged. A strip of darkness tore from its mouth and fell onto the floor, writhing like a leech made of sound. It carried the word guard inside it, but the letters kept changing shape, trying to hide whose command had spoken them. Ivara pulled her hand free. Her fingers were whole, though blood covered them to the wrist. The salt rushed over the fallen darkness. The leech command began to rot from the edges inward. White grains formed letters across the black marble. Varric Morth. The court went silent. Then the salt shifted again. Command. Inside Royal Guard Oath. A salt priestess dropped her bowl. The sound rang through the hall like a bell. Varric looked at the words, then at Ivara. His face remained composed, but the air around him had changed. The calm scholar was gone. Something older stood in his place now, something that had survived by making every wound look lawful. She writes with corrupted salt, he said. A cursed bride can make any grain accuse. Ivara almost laughed. She was too tired to make the sound. I did not write your name, she said. Your command did. A murmur began in the balconies. Small, dangerous. The court was not convinced, but it was no longer comfortable. That mattered. Varric had not ruled them by making every lie believable. He had ruled by making truth too expensive to speak aloud. Now a command with his name on it lay rotting on the floor between the rejected bride and the king. Torren's wolf shadow stepped back from Ivara. Its eyes flashed silver, only for a breath. Then Varric lifted the cane. The silver head opened wider. Not like an eye this time, like a lock. Torren stiffened. Ivara saw the scar at his throat darken again. The second mouth beneath his skin pressed outward, trying to seal over his own voice before it could return. Varric spoke softly. Kneel. The command did not strike Ivara. It struck Torren. The Alpha King crashed to one knee before the entire court. His wolf shadow fell with him, muzzle forced to the marble. The white wolf above Ivara snarled, but she felt its strength thinning. Her blood had made the salt a witness, not an endless weapon. Every command Varric gave demanded more from her palms, her body, her bond. Torren looked at her from the dais, one hand pressed to his throat. Do not spend yourself for my voice, his eyes warned. Ivara answered by dragging both bleeding hands through the salt and breaking the crescent fully open. The court recoiled as the sacred line collapsed. Varric smiled, thinking she had destroyed her last protection. Then every loose grain of salt in the Hall of Oaths began sliding toward the king. Across the floor, down the steps, over the rotted command that still carried Varric's name. Not toward Ivara, not toward the bond, toward Torren's throat. The scar beneath his jaw opened like a black keyhole, and from inside it came a child's breath, trapped behind 20 years of royal silence. The child's breath came out of Torren's throat, like something buried under stone. Small, broken, terrified. No one in the Hall of Oaths moved. The salt kept sliding toward him, grain by grain, leaving Ivara's broken crescent behind and crossing the black marble in pale streams. It climbed the dais steps, gathering at Torren's knees, his hands, the scar beneath his jaw. The white wolf above Ivara lowered its head, thinner now, its body flickering where her blood no longer fed the circle strongly enough. Ivara's palms shook. The salt wanted more. Not more pain for its own sake. More truth. More blood to hold the witness open. She pressed both hands harder into the marble, smearing blood through the remaining grains. "Show only what belongs to his voice," she whispered. The salt answered. It did not open the whole past. It opened one wound. Torren's scar split wider, black as a keyhole, and the child's breath became a room. The Hall of Oaths changed around them. Not fully. The court did not vanish. The nobles still stood in their balconies. The candles still burned low. Varric still held his cane. But over the present lay another knight, pale and thin as frost on glass. Torren at 13. Smaller, too thin in black mourning clothes, kneeling where the Alpha King now knelt. His father's funeral ash still marked his forehead. His hands were clenched so tightly in his lap that the nails had cut half-moons into his skin. Young Torren's wolf shadow crouched behind him, already large, already furious, but trapped inside a ring of salt-iron pins hammered into the marble. Beside the boy stood Lord Varric Morth, younger, but not kinder. He held the same black cane, its silver head open like a small lock with teeth. "You must learn the oath, voice," Varric said in the memory. "A king's voice is not his own. It belongs to the throne." Young Torren shook his head. "My wolf says no. Your wolf is grief. It says you should not put that in me." A few nobles in the present hall drew sharp breaths. Varric's face went still. The memory moved on. Young Torren tried to stand. The salt-iron pins around his wolf shadow burned white. The beast slammed against them, silent and trapped. Varric placed one hand on the boy's shoulder, almost gentle. "The border packs are waiting for weakness," he said. "Your father's blood is barely cold, and men already wonder whether a child can hold the north. If your judgment fails, my command must stand beneath yours." "I do not want your command. Kings do not want." Young Torren looked up at him, eyes bright with rage and fear. "Then I do not want to be king." The present hall went colder than winter. Varric pressed the silver lock of the cane against the hollow of the boy's throat. Torren screamed. The scream did not leave the memory. It entered the scar. A black mark opened beneath the boy's jaw. Something small and dark slid from the cane into his throat, shaped like a second mouth without lips. It settled under his skin and closed over his first royal vow before the words could form. Young Torren grabbed at his neck. Varric bent close. "When your heart makes you weak," he whispered, "my voice will preserve the crown." The memory shattered. The Hall of Oaths returned in full. Torren was still on one knee, one hand clawing at the scar beneath his jaw. His face had gone ashen. The second mouth pressed under his skin, now visible to every witness, opening and closing in silent panic. The salt around him turned black at the edges. Not because of Ivara, because of what it had found. A salt priestess whispered, "He was a child." Another said, "That is oath, trespass." Varric turned his head slightly. Both women fell silent. But silence no longer protected him. Ivara looked at Torren, and the pain in her chest shifted. It did not erase what his mouth had done. The rejection had still landed on her body before the court. But now she saw the wound beneath the wound, a king whose voice had been made into a corridor for another man long before she ever touched his life. Torren met her gaze. Shame moved across his face like a blade. "I did not know," he rasped. The second mouth tried to close over the words. Ivara dragged her bleeding fingers through the salt. It stayed open. Varric stepped down from the dais at last. "Enough," he said. No shout, no panic. That made it more dangerous. The king was 13, Varric told the court. His father was dead. 3 alpha houses were ready to break from the crown. I placed a regent's restraint in his oath, voice because a child's grief cannot be allowed to rule a kingdom. "You placed yourself inside him," Ivara said. "I preserved him. You used him. I governed through him until he was strong enough to govern himself." Torren's laugh came out rough and bloodied. "Then why is your command still there?" The question struck harder than accusation. For one breath, Varric had no answer. Then his eyes cooled. "Because strength is not the same as wisdom." He lifted the cane. The silver lock opened wider, and every blackened grain of salt near Torren's throat shivered backward as if struck by a dry wind. Ivara felt the salt wolf weaken above her. Her palms had lost too much blood. Varric saw that too. "You have given enough of yourself to make a spectacle," he said to her. "Now let the court see what happens when salt wolf blood is denied a lie to rot." He turned the cane toward her, not toward Torren, toward Ivara's mouth. Torren struggled to rise. Varric, the second mouth in his throat, opened first. "Silence her." The command came in Torren's royal tone, but Varric's will moved underneath it. Salt around Ivara's hands shot upward. Not as wolf, as chains. They wrapped her wrists, her arms, her throat. The white wolf collapsed into a storm of grains, trying to hold shape and failing. Ivara choked. The court surged. Torren roared, but the scar locked around his voice again. Varric stepped closer, cane lowered like a judge's staff. "Bind the bride's tongue," he said. "If she cannot speak to the salt cannot answer." The salt chain tightened across Ivara's mouth. Blood filled her lips. Then, beneath her sealed hands, one last untouched line of salt began to move. Not toward her, not toward Torren, toward the cut, half of her bridal veil lying forgotten on the floor. The torn veil lifted by itself. White grains stitched across its edge in a language older than oath law. And from the veil came a woman's voice Ivara had never heard before. "Daughter of salt, do not speak, bite." Ivara could not answer the voice. The salt chain had sealed her mouth too tightly. White grains pressed between her lips, dry and sharp, cutting into the soft skin until blood warmed her tongue. Her wrists were bound, her arms pinned. The remains of the white wolf shivered around her in scattered light, unable to form, while Varric's command held her silent. But the torn veil still floated above the marble. The half Varric had ordered cut from her head drifted like a pale wound in the air, sent silk-threaded now with moving salt. The voice that came from it was not loud. It did not sound like a goddess. It sounded like a woman speaking from somewhere beneath the floor, through teeth clenched against pain. "Daughter of salt, do not speak. Bite." The court did not understand. Varric did. His face sharpened. "Burn the veil," he ordered. A salt priestess moved first, frightened enough to obey the nearest authority. She lifted an oath lamp from its stand and reached toward the floating silk. Torren tried to stand. The second mouth under his throat opened. "Knail." He crashed back to the marble, one hand braced against the dais, blood running from the scar beneath his jaw. His wolf shadow strained beside him, silver eyes fixed on Ivara, but the oath lock held them both low. Ivara looked at the veil. The command was impossible. Her mouth was sealed. Her tongue bled. Her body shook from blood loss. Then she understood. Varric had bound her speech because he thought salt obeyed words. It did not. Not first. Before vows were spoken, they were tasted. Before kings swore by law, wolves sealed truth with teeth at throat, wrist, palm, and pulse. Salt remembered the mouth not only as voice, but as wound. Ivara bit down. The salt chain across her lips cut deep. Pain flashed white through her skull. Blood filled her mouth, hot against the dry grains. She bit harder, not at flesh, but at the command holding the salt in place. Her teeth ground through sacred crystals until they cracked. The chain trembled. Varric stepped forward. "Stop her." No one reached her in time. Ivara bit again. This time the salt answered. The grains between her teeth turned black for one heartbeat, then white, then bright as moonlit bone. The chain across her mouth broke apart, not falling, but scattering outward in a spray of tiny fangs. Each grain struck the marble and pointed toward Torren's throat. The salt priestess holding the lamp froze. The torn veil twisted away from the flame and wrapped once around her wrist, not burning, not hurting, only stopping her hand. The woman stared down at the silk, trembling. From the veil, the woman's voice spoke again. "Witness is not asked from the comfortable." Ivara spat blood and salt onto the marble. The white grains struck the floor and moved. Not into letters this time, into teeth. A crescent of small white fangs formed between her and the dais, all facing the same direction, the second mouth in Torren's throat. The court recoiled. Varric lifted his cane. "She has turned bridal salt into witchcraft." Ivara's lips were bloodied. Her voice came rough, barely more than breath. "No." The fangs clicked once. The whole hall heard it. I turned your gag into witness. The crescent of salt teeth rushed across the floor. Varric struck his cane down, and a black ring of command snapped toward them. The first row of teeth shattered, the second blackened. But the third reached Torren, climbed his armor, and closed around the dark shape beneath his scar. Torren arched backward. A sound tore from him, half his voice, half the false one buried under it. Ivara flinched, but she did not stop the salt. If she stopped now, Varric would bury this moment under law before the court understood what it had seen. He would call her cursed, call the salt corrupted, call Torren unstable. He would turn every wound back into an excuse. So she crawled forward, not gracefully, not like a queen, like a woman refusing to be silenced. The salt around her wrists cracked with each movement. Blood streaked the marble beneath her palms. The torn bridal train dragged behind her. Every inch hurt. Every noble in the hall watched. Torren saw her coming and shook his head once. Do not. She ignored him. He had warned her not to spend herself for his voice, but Varric had spent both of them for years. Ivara reached the first dais step and pressed her bleeding mouth to the marble. The court gasped. Salt wolf blood did not need a full circle now. It had teeth. It had blood. It had the wound Varric himself had made. Ivara bit the edge of the dais step. The white fangs in Torren's throat sank deeper. The second mouth screamed, not with Torren's voice, with Varric's. The sound burst through the Hall of Oaths, old and furious, stripped of polish. Several nobles staggered as if the scream had entered their own teeth. Varric's cane split wider at the silver head, and inside it something dark moved, echoing the shape of the mouth beneath Torren's skin. The salt had found the matching lock. Ivara lifted her head, blood on her lips. There, she whispered. Torren's eyes fixed on Varric. The Alpha King's true voice came out ragged, but clear. You kept the key. Varric's expression hardened. The court turned toward the cane. For the first time, they did not look quickly away. The silver head of Varric's cane was no ornament. It had a little jaw carved into it, almost hidden under royal engraving. Black salt gathered between its teeth. A salt priestess dropped to her knees. That is oath metal, she whispered. Forbidden after the child, regencies. Varric looked at her. She lowered her head, but the words had already entered the room. Ivara's torn veil drifted toward Torren now, carrying the woman's voice softer than before. Bite the key, daughter, not the king. Ivara understood too late. Varric did not. He swung the cane toward her. Torren moved first. Still on one knee, still half-bound, he caught the cane with one bare hand before it struck Ivara's face. The oath metal burned his palm black. He did not let go. Varric's calm shattered. Release it. The second mouth in Torren's throat opened to repeat the command. Ivara lunged. Not at Varric. At the cane. She sank her bloodied teeth into the silver jaw. The hall exploded in white light. Varric screamed. Torren screamed. The cane screamed loudest of all. The silver head cracked between Ivara's teeth, and from inside it spilled a stream of black salt shaped like all the words Torren had never been allowed to say. The first one struck the marble at Ivara's knees. Merce. The second came after it. No. The third crawled toward Torren like a wounded child. Please. Then the black salt lifted from the broken cane and flew straight into the scar beneath Torren's throat. The black salt struck Torren's scar and vanished under his skin. For one breath, nothing happened. Then the Alpha King made a sound no king should make before his court. Not a command. Not arwar. A broken inhale, as if 20 years of swallowed words had entered his throat at once and found no room to stand. Torren dropped both hands to the marble. His shoulders bowed. The scar beneath his jaw split open in a thin black line, not bleeding, but spilling smoke-dark grains that circled his mouth like a storm of unsaid things. Merce. No. Please. Each word had fallen from Varric's cane. Each word had belonged to Torren before it was taken. Now they returned not as speech, but as weight. Ivara crouched on the dais step with blood on her lips and salt burning between her teeth. Her jaw ached where she had bitten through oath metal. Her hands shook. The white wolf around her was gone, scattered into grains across the floor. but she could still feel it in the salt nearest her skin. Listening, waiting, Torren tried to speak. The second mouth in his throat opened first. Varric's voice came out of it. Enough. The court recoiled. The sound did not pretend anymore. It was not hidden beneath Torren's tone, not polished into royal authority. It was Varric Morth, cold and old and exposed, speaking through the king's wound. Torren's true mouth bared his teeth. No. One word. Ragged. His. The marble cracked under Varric's cane. For the first time, the oath-regent looked afraid not of Ivara, but of Torren. Ivara understood why. The salt had not freed the whole voice. Not yet. It had returned the first stolen words, the words a child had tried to say when the lock was placed in his throat. Refusal. Mercy. Fear. The small human sounds Varric had cut away so a grieving boy could become a governable king. Torren lifted his head. His eyes were silver. Not the polished silver of court power, the raw silver of a wolf finally tasting air. Varric stepped back once, then stopped himself. Majesty, your bride has poisoned your throat with salt blood. Do not mistake pain for truth. Torren tried to stand. The second mouth snapped open again. Kneel. His body slammed back down. Ivara moved before the command could settle. She spat blood and salt into her palm, pressed it to the dais step, and dragged a line across the marble between Torren and Varric. It was not a circle, not a shield, a cut. The command hit the line and split. Half struck Torren, forcing one knee down. Half struck the floor, where the salt took it and began to rot. Ivara swayed. Varric saw her weakness. You cannot keep cutting my commands, he said. Every witness costs blood. Every truth asks a body to hold it. How much of yourself will you spend for a king who rejected you? The question was cruel, because it was almost honest. Torren looked at her. There was warning in his eyes again. Do not. Ivara hated him for it, not because he was wrong, but because he understood the price and still could not stop it. Because part of her wanted him to command her to quit so she could hate him cleanly. Instead, he kept refusing to make her sacrifice feel noble. Ivara pressed her bleeding palm harder into the salt. I am not spending myself for his rejection, she said. Her voice was hoarse, cut by salt. I am spending blood because you used his mouth to make it. The line on the marble flared white. The rotting command curled inward, revealing a mark inside it. Varric's seal, a black thorn wrapped around a wolf's tongue. The court saw. This time the murmur was louder. A captain near the lower pillars stepped forward. Lord Morth, is that your regent seal? Varric turned his head slowly. The captain stopped moving. Fear remained. But fear had begun to choose sides. Varric lifted the broken cane. The silver jaw was cracked now, one side hanging loose, black salt dripping from it like old blood. The king was a child when I took regency. Every seal I placed was lawful. Torren's true voice forced itself out again. Not this. 2 words. The hall shook. The second mouth thrashed under his skin, trying to close over them. Ivara reached for the torn bridal veil still floating near the dais. It drifted into her hand, the salt-threaded edge cool against her torn fingers. The woman's voice inside it whispered, Not every word must be spoken. Some must be bitten free. Ivara looked at Torren's throat, then at the broken cane. The key was cracked, but the lock remained inside him. If she bit the scar, the court would see bride attacking king. If Torren tore it himself, the command might tear his voice out with it. Varric knew the same thing. His confidence returned by inches. Stand away from him, he told Ivara. The bride has already drawn royal blood by sorcery. One more touch, and I will have lawful cause to salt, bury her before dawn. Torren's wolf shadow rose behind him, shaking against the forced kneel. Its muzzle lifted from the marble. A low growl moved through the hall. Varric raised the cane toward it. Guard the oath. The wolf shadow froze. Ivara felt the salt flinch. That command was older and deeper than the first. Not a quick order. A root command. It ran through the scar, the cane, the regent's seal, and something beneath the dais itself. The old oath stone. Ivara looked down. Under the black marble, beneath Torren's knees, white lines had begun to glow. Not salt poured tonight. Ancient salt, sealed into the foundation of the Hall of Oaths when the first Ashvane king took the throne. Varric had not only locked Torren's throat, he had tied the lock into the hall. Torren saw it too. His face went still. Varric smiled faintly. Now you understand. A king's voice belongs first to the kingdom. Ivara rose unsteadily. Blood ran from her palms onto the dais. No, she said. A king's voice belongs first to his own throat. The ancient salt beneath the marble brightened. The hall answered her. Not with a wolf this time. With a crack. A long, white fracture opened from Torren's knees to the base of the throne, splitting the old oath stone under the dais. From inside the fracture came the trapped child's breath again. Then a boy's voice, small and shaking, spoke from beneath the floor. Uncle, please don't. Torren closed his eyes. The court went utterly silent, and Varric Morth's cane began to bleed black salt. The boy's voice did not echo. It waited. That was worse. It waited beneath the cracked marble as if it had been there for 20 years, small and breathless, and still expecting someone to stop the hand descending toward its throat. Uncle, please don't. Torren did not move. The Alpha King remained on one knee before the throne that had used his voice as law. One hand braced on the black floor, the other pressed to the scar under his jaw. The second mouth beneath his skin opened and closed without sound. His wolf shadow shook beside him, half risen, half bound, silver eyes fixed on the white fracture glowing beneath the dais. The court had heard the child. No oath law could make them unhear it. Lord Varric Morth's cracked cane bled black salt onto the marble. Grain by grain, it fell from the broken silver jaw and crawled toward the fracture like insects seeking a wound to seal. Ivara saw what it meant to do. Not attack. Bure. Varric had survived by burying things before they could become truth. She moved first. Her hands were nearly numb from blood loss, but numbness had become its own mercy. She seized the torn bridal veil and dropped it across the glowing crack. White grains caught in the silk. The veil darkened where the black salt touched it, then brightened again along the cut edge. The woman's voice inside the veil whispered, "Do not cover the wound, line it." Ivara understood. She dragged the veil along the fracture, not hiding it, but marking its length. Her blood smeared through the salt-threaded silk. The crack answered, widening by a finger's breadth. The child's breath came again. Torren flinched. Varric lifted the cane. Enough. The bride profanes the foundation oath. No, Ivara said, though her voice scraped raw. She is showing where you hid it. Varric's eyes cut to her. You know nothing of kingdoms. I know what a gag feels like. The words struck harder than she intended. Torren looked at her. Not as king, not as bridegroom. As a man who had just realized her mouth had been sealed tonight by the same law that had sealed his when he was a boy. The fracture beneath them brightened. The boy's voice whispered again, weaker this time. I do not want your command. The court shifted. A noblewoman near the front covered her mouth. A border lord lowered his eyes. 2 guards glanced at Torren's scar, then at Varric's cane, and did not look away quickly enough. Varric saw every fracture in their loyalty. His calm returned, hard and polished. A child's fear is not evidence. A kingdom is not preserved by asking boys what they want. Torren's true mouth opened. The second mouth under his skin moved faster. Varric's voice came through it. The throne required restraint. Torren's jaw locked. His hand dug into the marble. Ivara crawled up one more step, leaving blood behind her. Torren. His eyes came to her. She almost said, fight him. She almost said, speak. But those were commands, too. So she gave him no order. She placed the torn veil on the marble between them and whispered, It is yours if you want it back. The hall seemed to hold its breath. Torren stared at the veil, at the salt-threaded fracture beneath it, at the black grains spilling from Varric's cane. His wolf shadow lifted its head a little higher. Then Torren did something no one in the court expected. He bowed his head toward the crack in the floor. Not to the throne. Not to Varric. To the buried voice. I heard you, he said. The words came broken, but they came from his true mouth. The fracture pulsed. The boy beneath the floor inhaled sharply, as if the sound had reached him across 20 years. Varric's face went pale with anger. Majesty, do not indulge this. Torren's hand lifted. Not in command. In refusal. He pressed 2 fingers against his own scar. The second mouth snapped at them beneath his skin. Blood beaded along his throat. His body trembled from the effort of touching the lock without obeying it. "I heard you," he said again, stronger. And he should have stopped. The Hall of Oaths cracked from wall to wall. Not enough to collapse. Enough to wake. Ancient salt lines flared beneath the marble, revealing a hidden pattern no one had seen in generations. Not a crown, not a throne, but a wolf's open jaws around a human throat. The original Oathstone had not been built to make kings obey regents. It had been built to bite false command out of royal voices. Varric had reversed it. The realization moved through the court before anyone dared speak. Ivara's breath caught. This was why salt wolf blood frightened him. Not because it destroyed bonds, because it remembered what salt had been before law made it obedient. Torren's wolf shadow rose another inch. The second mouth in his throat screamed without sound. Varric stepped toward him. "You will tear your own voice apart." Torren looked up. For the first time that night, his expression held no confusion. "Better mine torn," he rasped, "than yours wearing it." He gripped the edge of the cracked oathstone with one hand. Ivara felt the salt surge. The white wolf did not reform fully. It appeared in pieces, a paw beside her shoulder, a pale eye above the dais, a ridge of luminous salt along the fracture. Not enough to save them, enough to witness. Torren bent over the crack. From below, the boy's voice whispered, "Please." Torren answered, "No." The word was not loud. It was not royal. It was the first refusal he had ever been denied. The buried salt exploded upward. Black grains burst from the fracture, carrying 20 years of swallowed commands. Kneel, sign, reject, silence, guard, obey. They rose like a swarm and spun around Torren's throat, trying to enter the scar again. Ivara threw herself forward and slammed both bleeding palms onto the veil. "Witness the difference," she cried. The white salt flared. Every command carrying Varric's seal turned black. Every word that belonged to Torren remained silver. For one impossible heartbeat, the court saw 2 voices circling the same throat. Then Varric's cane cracked down. The fracture slammed shut halfway. The boy's voice vanished beneath stone. Torren choked. Ivara screamed, but no sound came from her mouth. The backlash stole it cleanly, leaving her breathless over the veil. Varric stood above them, cane bleeding faster now, his face no longer calm. "If the bride wants to bite old law," he said, "then old law may bite back." He turned to the salt priestesses. "Prepare the bride, burial rite." The priestesses went white. Torren forced one word through blood and command. "No." Varric looked at him with cold satisfaction. "That is not your voice yet, Majesty." Then the floor beneath Ivara's knees opened into a circle of black salt. The black salt opened under Ivara like a mouth. She dropped before Torren could reach her. Not far, only deep enough for the court to see her vanish to the waist inside the floor, bridal silk swallowed by a perfect black circle where the marble had been solid a breath before. Salt closed around her ribs, around her arms, around her bleeding wrists. It did not burn like the white circle had burned. It remembered. That was worse. The black salt pressed old fear into her skin. Women screaming without sound. Brides kneeling with veils over their faces. Names scraped from marriage books. Oaths rewritten after the women who challenged them were buried under court law and called cursed for dying there. Ivara gasped. The salt surged to her throat. Torrenlunget. Varric's cane struck once. The second mouth beneath Torren's scar opened, and his body locked at the edge of the cracked dais. One hand stretched toward her but unable to cross the last step. His wolf shadow dragged itself forward, claws gouging the marble, but the ancient salt lines under the floor caught it by the paws. "Do not move, Majesty," Varric said. "The right is lawful." Torren's true voice came out like broken iron. "This is murder." "No." Varric looked down at Ivara with cold patience. "This is burial before contamination spreads." The salt priestesses stood frozen. One of them whispered, "Bride, burial has not been called in 100 years." "Then remember your vows," Varric said. No one moved. Fear held them all. Ivara could not blame them. Fear had held her too. Fear of being called cursed. Fear of proving them right. Fear that every darkened grain she had touched since childhood meant there was something rotten in her blood. The black salt tightened. It wanted that fear. It fed on it. Her bound hands were trapped beneath the surface, palms forced open in the dark. She could not reach the white salt scattered across the floor. She could not touch Torren. She could not command the broken crescent or the pale wolf that had once risen around her. Varric stepped to the edge of the burial circle. "Let the court witness," he said. "Salt wolf blood cannot preserve. It devours. It turns sacred law into accusation, royal bonds into weakness, and brides into weapons." The black salt climbed higher. Ivara's breath shortened. For one terrible heartbeat, she nearly believed him. Then the torn bridal veil brushed her cheek. It had fallen with her. The silk floated on the black salt like a pale strip of moon caught on poisoned water. Its cut edge still held white grains stitched into the threads by the woman's unseen voice. "Do not cover the wound. Line it." Ivara turned her face and caught the veil between her teeth. The court stared. Varric's mouth tightened. Ivara bit down. The veil tore. White salt burst from the threads into her mouth, sharp and bright, mixing with blood. The black salt around her chest recoiled as if it had been struck. Not enough to free her, enough to give her one breath. She used it. Ivara forced her trapped palms open beneath the black surface and dragged her nails through the salt she could not see. Her fingers found no floor, only depth, only old grains packed with old silence. So she did what the woman's voice had told her. She lined the wound. With her own blood. She pressed her split palms outward and drew a circle inside the burial circle, not around herself, but through the dark. The black salt tried to close over her hands. She bit harder into the veil until blood ran down her chin. White grains spilled from her mouth. They fell onto the black circle. The two salts met. The burial rite screamed. Not like a beast, like a door being forced open. Across the Hall of Oaths, the marble around Ivara's burial circle lit with markings hidden under centuries of polish. Not new words, old ones. The first law carved beneath the later law. The salt priestess who had dropped her bowl stepped forward, trembling. "That is not the bride burial text." Varric turned on her. Silence. But she was already reading. Her voice shook, then steadied. "Let the false binder be buried beneath the vow he twisted." The court went still. Ivara looked up through blood and salt. Falsebinner, not cursed bride. The rite had not been made to bury women who rotted lies. It had been made to bury those who used vows to cage another's voice. Varric's eyes went flat. For the first time, he moved without elegance. He raised the broken cane toward the priestess. Torren's wolf shadow surged. The ancient salt lines caught it again, but this time they did not hold as tightly. Silver fire ran through the black paws. Torren pressed 2 fingers into his own scar, forcing the second mouth open before it could speak over him. "No," he said. The word cracked the edge of the burial circle. "Only a little. Enough." Ivara felt one hand break free beneath the black salt. She thrust it upward. Her palm emerged dark to the wrist, packed with black grains. She slapped it against the edge of the circle and dragged downward, smearing blood through the old carving. "Witness the binder," she rasped. The black salt stopped climbing. Every grain turned toward Varric. The court saw it. The burial circle was no longer swallowing Ivara. It was listening past her. Varric stepped back. The cane bled faster, black salt pouring from its cracked silver jaw and striking the marble in frantic patterns. He tried to speak a command, but the words stuttered before leaving his mouth. Because the rite had heard its proper prey, Ivara pulled another breath through broken lips. "Not bride," she whispered. The salt answered, in a low, grinding shift beneath the floor. "Binder." The word formed around the circle in white fire. Varric's calm shattered completely. "Close the rite," he commanded the priestesses. None of them obeyed. Torren rose 1 inch from his forced kneel. Blood ran down his throat. His true voice was barely alive, but it reached the hall. "Name him." The burial circle widened. Note under Ivara now. Toward Varric Morth. Black salt streamed across the marble like a tide. For one breath, the court watched the oath-regent retreat from the very law he had called sacred. Then the broken cane opened its silver jaw and spoke with Torren's stolen childhood voice. "Please." The black salt stopped. Torren froze. Ivara's heart dropped. Varric smiled through bloodless lips, and every grain in the burial rite turned back toward the Alpha King. Every grain in the burial rite turned toward Torren. The black salt left Ivara's waist in a sudden rush, dropping her hard against the edge of the broken circle. She caught herself on both hands and nearly collapsed when pain flared through her palms. Around her, the old rite changed direction, flowing across the marble in a dark tide toward the Alpha King. Torren did not move away. He stood half-risen from his forced kneel, blood running down his throat, one hand pressed over the scar that had become a keyhole. His wolf shadow braced beside him, no longer fully pinned but not free either, its silver eyes burning through smoke. The cane spoke again, not in Varric's voice, in the child's. Please. The black salt surged faster. The court recoiled from the dais. Salt priestesses clutched each other. One whispered, "The rite has named the king." No, Ivara Sable. No one heard her. Varric did. He smiled, pale and terrible. "Old law is exacting, my lady. It hears what is spoken. If the king's own voice begs from the binder's key, then the king is bound to the guilt. You stole that voice," Ivara said, "and yet it is his." Torren's face tightened. That was the cruelty of it. The word was his, the plea was his. The fear belonged to the boy he had been. Varric had not invented the pain. He had only kept it, caged it, and now threw it before the rite like meat, before starving wolves. The black salt reached the dais steps. Torren's wolf shadow lunged to block it, but the first touch of the burial salt drove it back with a hiss. Silver fire flickered along its paws. Ivara dragged herself forward. The torn bridal veil was still in her fist, its edge stiff with salt and blood. She could barely feel her fingers. Her mouth tasted of iron and old law. But she saw what Varric wanted now. If the rite buried Torren, the court would remember only that salt wolf blood had turned bride burial against the king. Varric would survive as the man who warned them. She pressed the veil between her teeth and bit until white grains spilled loose. The woman's voice inside the silk whispered, weaker now, "Do not deny the child, deny the cage." Ivara froze. That was the difference. The child's plea was true. The hand using it was false. Ivara spat blood and salt across the marble, then slammed both palms onto the floor between the black tide and Torren. "Witness the holder," she said. The salt hesitated. Varric lifted the cane. "Please." The child's voice broke on the word. The black tide lunged again. Ivara screamed, not with sound, but with both hands. She dragged her palms outward through the salt, making two raw lines that crossed in front of Torren like an open bite. Witness who kept it. The white grains from the veil flared. For one heartbeat, the black salt split into two streams. One stream remained silver black, trembling toward Torren's throat. That was the child's fear. His pain. His stolen plea. The other turned thick and black, crawling back toward Varric's cane. That was the hand that had held it. The court saw the difference. A border lord whispered, "The plea is the king's." The salt priestess answered, "The cage is Morth's." Varric's eyes hardened. He swung the broken cane toward Torren, and the silver jaw opened wide enough to show the darkness packed inside it. "Majesty," Varric said, no longer hiding the command beneath courtesy. "Take back your voice." Torren flinched. Ivara understood too late. The command was not meant to silence him. It was meant to tempt him. If Torren seized every stolen word at once, the lock would tear open. The old fear, the old obedience, the regent's commands, and the child's trapped voice would all rush back through his throat together. He might regain his speech only to become the path Varric needed to command the whole hall one final time. Torren understood too. His gaze met Ivara's. There was no softness in it now. No easy plea for forgiveness. Only the terrible clarity of a man standing before the wound that made him king and cage both. "Ivara," he said, and the sound was fully his. The black salt stopped. Just for that word. He looked at the court then, at the priestesses, the guards, the nobles who had watched his bride kneel, and called it law because law was easier than courage. "I will not take back my voice through his key." Varric's smile vanished. Torren lowered his hand from his throat. The scar opened wider. The second mouth writhed beneath his skin, furious and afraid. He placed 2 fingers at the edge of the wound. Ivara tried to move toward him. He shook his head once. Not a command. A request. Then Torren dug his fingers into the scar and pulled. The Hall of Oaths shook. Blood ran black down his neck. The second mouth tore halfway from beneath his skin, still rooted in him by threads of shadow and salt. Varric cried out as if the wound had opened in his own throat. The broken cane snapped another inch. Torren's voice emerged through clenched teeth. I do not reclaim what was kept in a cage. The child's plea trembled in the air. Torren's eyes filled with pain, but he did not look away from it. I release it to witness. The stolen child's voice broke free from the cane. It flew not into Torren's throat, but into the torn bridal veil between Ivara's bloody hands. The silk blazed white. The woman's voice inside it cried out in answer, and the veil unfurled across the floor like a banner made from a wound. On it, Salt wrote a name. Not Ivara's. Not Torren's. Varric Morth. Oathbinder. The burial rite turned. All of it. Black salt rose from the floor in a towering ring around Varric. For the first time, the oath-regent stumbled. Then his eyes went cold with final decision. He drove the broken cane into his own palm. Blood struck the silver jaw. Every oath mark in the Hall of Oaths ignited black. Varric spoke through the cane, the scar, the floor, and every old law he had twisted. If the crown will not obey, he said, then the court will. Every noble, guard, and priestess in the hall dropped to their knees. Torren stayed standing. Ivara stayed bleeding. And the black salt rose behind Varric, in the shape of a wolf with no face. The faceless wolf rose higher than the throne. It had no eyes, no mouth, no wound the court could pity. Its body was made of black salt and old obedience, every grain packed with a command someone had mistaken for law. It stood behind Lord Varric Morth like a god carved from every silence he had ever forced into another throat. The court remained on its knees. Nobles, guards, salt priestesses, men who had sent others to die with one clean word. Women who had looked away because looking cost too much. All of them bowed under Varric's final command, their heads bent, their mouths closed, their wolves whimpering in their shadows. Only 2 people still stood against the old law. Torren Ashvane, bleeding from the scar beneath his jaw. Ivara Sable, shaking in a ruined bridal gown, blood dripping from her palms onto the torn veil between them. Varric looked at them with the cold disappointment of a man watching children refuse wisdom. You could have survived this, he said to Torren. You could have kept the crown, the court, the border packs, even the bride if you learned to rule her properly. Torren's wolf shadow snarled. Varric's faceless wolf bent over it, and the royal shadow flinched under the weight of old command. Torren did not. My voice was never your throne, he said. The words cost him. Ivara saw it in the tightening of his jaw, in the black blood threading down his neck, in the second mouth still half-rooted beneath his skin. Every sentence pulled at the lock Varric had planted there when he was a grieving boy. But Torren did not look away. Varric lifted the broken cane. Then lose it. The faceless wolf opened where a mouth should have been. A storm of black salt rushed toward Torren's throat. Ivara moved first. Not between Torren and the attack. That would have made her a shield again. Another body spent to preserve a king. Instead, she dropped to her knees beside the torn veil and pressed both bleeding hands into the salt-written name. Varric Morth, Oathbinder. Her blood spread through the letters. Witness the source, she whispered. The black storm struck Torren, but the veil pulled its shadow sideways. Half the salt entered the scar beneath his jaw. Half tore backward toward Varric's cane. The faceless wolf buckled. Its body split between the voice it wanted to cage and the hand that had shaped the cage. Varric staggered. The kneeling court gasped as if one throat had been struck. Ivara bit the edge of the veil again. Her teeth sank into salt and silk. Pain flashed through her mouth, but beneath it came the woman's voice, no longer distant. Good, the voice whispered. Now make him choose without a command. Ivara looked at Torren. He was bent forward, both hands at his throat, fighting not to drag the stolen voice back into himself through Varric's key. The child's released plea trembled in the veil beneath her palms. Mercy. No. Please. They were not royal words. They were human ones. Ivara understood then why salt wolf blood had been feared. It did not only rot false vows, it demanded that true vows survive without force. Torren, she said. His eyes found hers through pain. She wanted to tell him how to win. To say bite the lock, tear the mouth free, command the court back to its feet. But every order, even one shaped like help, felt wrong inside the salt now. So she gave him truth instead. If you take your voice back through his key, he remains part of it. Torren's face went still. Varric heard her and laughed, though blood darkened his teeth. Without the key, he has no royal oath. Without oath voice, he is only a wolf in armor. Ivara did not look at Varric. Then speak as that, she said to Torren. The hall shook, not from magic, from the fear that passed through every noble still kneeling. A king without oath voice was a king without the oldest weapon of his line. No command that could bend wolves by blood. No sentence that could bind houses through salt law. No voice that made rebellion tremble before steel was drawn. Torren understood. His court understood. Varric understood most of all. No, the oath-regent said. That single word carried more fear than all his commands. Torren slowly lowered his hands from his throat. The second mouth writhed beneath his skin, hungry and furious, begging him without sound to reclaim it. His wolf shadow rose beside him, trembling, no longer fully bound. The faceless black wolf towered over them both. Torren looked at the kneeling court, then at Ivara. Not as a man asking to be saved, as a man asking to be witnessed while he gave up the weapon that had wounded them both. I release the oath, voice that was made through pain, he said. The second mouth screamed. Varric screamed with it. Torren dug his fingers into the scar, not to pull the stolen voice back, but to tear the lock open. Black salt burst from his throat. The faceless wolf lunged. Ivara slammed both palms onto the veil. Witness freely given blood, she cried. White salt erupted from the torn silk. The white wolf returned. Not as a shield around Ivara, not as a beast belonging to her alone. It rose from every honest wound in the hall, from her bitten mouth, from Torren's torn throat, from the priestess who had dared name oath metal, from the court's first trembling refusal to look away. It formed above the black marble, in a blaze of white salt and moonlit breath, scarred by red streaks of blood, terrible and beautiful. The black, faceless wolf attacked. The white wolf did not meet it with claws. It opened its jaws and bit the command at the center of it. The faceless wolf shattered. Black salt rained across the Hall of Oaths, but wherever it touched blood freely given, it turned white. The command over the court broke in a wave. Nobles collapsed forward, choking. Guards tore off their helmets. Salt priestesses sobbed over their bowls. Varric fell to one knee, not by command, by the weight of every false vow returning to the hand that made it. The broken cane split down the center. Its silver jaw cracked apart, and from inside spilled the last of Torren's stolen childhood words. They did not fly to the king. They settled into the torn veil like seeds into winter ground. Torren staggered. Ivara caught him by the forearm. Only that. Not his hand, not his throat, not the place where the bond still trembled between them, wounded but not gone. Torren looked down at her fingers on his arm, then back at her face. I have no oath, voice, he said. His voice was rough, ordinary, alive. Ivara's eyes burned. Then do not waste the one you have. Varric laughed from the floor, a ruined sound. The border houses will tear him apart. Torren turned toward him. For the first time, his words carried no hidden command, no royal force, no old magic, making obedience easier than choice. Then they will hear me without a chain, he said. And if they refuse, I will fight them without using another child's throat as my crown. Silence followed. Then the salt priestess who had first named oath metal rose. She did not bow to Torren. She bowed to Ivara, not low, not as servant to queen, as witness to witness. One by one, others followed. Not all. Some nobles remained frozen, proud and frightened and calculating. That was better than worship. Worship was only another cage, polished clean. Ivara looked at Varric. The black salt had crawled over his hands, up his sleeves, around the broken cane still clutched in his fingers. It did not kill him. It bound him in the shape of his own law. The white wolf lowered its head beside Ivara, waiting. She knew what the court expected. Vengeance. A bride humiliated before them should want blood. Part of her did, but salt wolf blood did not rot false vows, so cruelty could wear a sweeter face. Lord Varric Morth, Ivara said, her voice raw, you will live. Varric's eyes flashed. You will name every throat you locked, every vow you altered, every bride you buried under law and called cursed. She stepped closer, blood and salt drying on her ruined gown. You will speak until your own voice hates you. The black salt tightened around him. For the first time, Varric had no command left. Torren stood beside Ivara, unsteady but upright. The mate thread between them still existed, thin and bright, no longer burning, no longer being eaten by the circle. It did not pull her to him. It did not excuse him. It simply remained, wounded and waiting for truth to decide what law had tried to force. Torren looked at it, then at her. I rejected you with a stolen voice, he said, but the wound was still given through my mouth. I will not ask the bond to forgive what I have not earned. The court listened. Ivra listened too. You are free of my throne, he said, free of my court. Free of every vow spoken tonight. If you leave, no wolf follows. If you stay, no salt binds you unless your own hands draw the circle. Ivara's throat tightened. That was not a choosing. That was a door opened without a chain. She looked at the Hall of Oaths, the cracked marble, the kneeling court, the broken burial circle, the torn bridal veil glowing softly with salt, and stolen words finally laid to rest. She had entered this hall as a cursed bride they expected to dissolve. Now the salt waited for her answer. Not Torren, not the throne, the salt. Ivara bent and lifted the torn veil from the floor. It was no longer white. Blood had marked it. Salt had stitched it. Truth had ruined and remade it. She wrapped it once around her wounded palms. Then she looked at Torren. I will not be your Luna, because your court needs proof that you are merciful. His face tightened, but he accepted the blow. I know. I will not be the bride who makes your voice look clean. I know. And I will not kneel in any circle I did not draw. Torren bowed his head. Not as king to subject. As man to woman. Then draw none until you wish to. Dawn touched the high windows. The first light entered the Hall of Oaths and struck the salt scattered across the floor. Every false command Varric had spoken turned black and crumbled. Every honest wound remained white. Ivara stepped out of the broken burial circle. No one stopped her. Torren did not reach for her. That was why, after 3 steps, she turned back. Not to forgive. Not yet. To choose the next breath without fear deciding it for her. The white wolf walked at her side, no longer towering, no longer shielding, but pacing like something that had always lived in her blood and had finally been allowed to leave tracks. Behind her, Torren Ashvane stood with no oath voice, no cane, no hidden command, and no easy claim to the woman his stolen words had wounded. Still, when Ivara reached the ruined doors of the hall, she heard his ordinary voice behind her. Ivara. She paused. He did not command. He only said, when you are ready, I will answer whatever circle you draw. Ivara looked back once. The salt beneath her feet brightened. Not as a bond, as witness. And for the first time since the court had poured a white circle around her knees, Ivara smiled without bleeding.